Hey, Ag Teacher Thoughts here. Our sugar treatment distillation has completed. Now, if you were a part of watching that other video, you might notice there's something wrong here. So we did our calculations and we were like, this should totally be 2 liters of alcohol. And yet we are not there. So why? What went wrong? Well, schools are learning institutions, and Mr. McDowell, the science teacher, and I are learning. So this experiment, the one with the sugar treatment that Mr. McDowell was working on with his students, where they were doing perfect molar ratios, and we figured everything out and said it's going to be a perfect 11%, and we should get exactly 2.09 liters of ethanol. We left something out. See, unlike a pure chemical reaction, this reaction actually requires an organism. And in this case, yeast. So a brewer's yeast. And Mr. McDowell and I, we're new at working with brewer's yeast. Now, what we had in that jar is we did have a small starter culture of orange juice with our brewer's yeast, and that was our starter culture. And then we mixed it in with our perfect molar ratio of sugar and water. But it didn't thrive. So when I was watching it, I kind of had some questions on why it just wasn't bubbling as much. Why wasn't it growing? Why wasn't it putting off excess CO2 like I'd seen on one of our previous runs? And I was kind of puzzled by that and started wondering if it was the fact that we were just using a pure sugar mix. From my experience as a baker, doing work at home with bread and things like that, I know that I use sugar, there's flour, and then I also include oil with my yeast. So my yeast starter culture is usually sugar, oil, and yeast at 115 to 112 degrees, and I get great results with my yeast making lots of carbon dioxide. But with this one, it just wasn't reacting fast enough. So while I had some time, I did some digging. And when you're doing ethanol production and you're doing experiments, you have to rely on experts. And of course, when it comes to experts, humans have made alcohol for reasons other than fuel for millennia. We've done it for thousands of years, and we've distilled and brewed all sorts of organic matter. So I knew that I could turn to the brewing industry and find out why. Why did this mix not produce? It's maybe 5 or 10%. I haven't measured it yet to figure out why it just wasn't where it was supposed to be. And the conclusion that I've come is it's a nutritional issue. So as the ag teacher, my expertise is growing things. Specifically, I grow plants, so I'm very, very knowledgeable about plants. And yeast is one of those things that I know scientists have gone back and forth for years. Is yeast a bacteria? Is it a fungus? And they've kind of gone back and forth. So as an ag teacher, I kind of understand that there's some nutritional requirements that we should probably be doing in there. So my expertise being plants, I'm always looking at NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and understanding if we've got the right mix, then the plants are going to grow good. And I was just kind of bugged by the idea. I didn't think it was right. So turning to the brewing industry, it's actually the seltzer industry that had the answer for me. So your hard seltzers are basically brewed with a pure sugar mix. There's not any wheat in there. There's no grains. It's sugar and water and yeast. But you have to add something else. There has to be more nutrition than that. So they actually have supplements that they add to their sugar water mix to feed the yeast cells' other needs. So that they can develop cell walls, that they can divide properly, that they can have resistance to various changes in the fluids that you're growing them in. And so that's the answer, is we were lacking nutrients for our yeast. So Mr. McDowell and I are working through some of that information to see if we have basically stuff out of the chemistry lab storage closet that we can add to this mix and get it to restart. So we'll re-inoculate it with yeast, and we'll add some nutrients in there to make sure that our yeast have enough food to do the right job. Yeah, it's a learning process. And those of you that are ag teachers that have happened across my videos about ethanol, we're working on a curricula for this. We're making our mistakes, and we're seeing what works well. And we'll put things together as far as a good, solid lab for you, so that when you're ready to start doing ethanol production lab work in your lab space or your shop space, that you don't have to go through the same growing pains and mistakes that we do. So yeah, this was our result. Not what we wanted. But at least now we understand what the problem is, and we can go through and rectify that by creating a nutritional mix to add in with our sugar to give our yeast a better start. The other thing that we can look at real quick is we can come over and look at our grain mix. So this is our wheat, and this one is still warm. Although looking at it, it too has kind of slowed down. So I'm wondering if this one has actually reached completion and where it might be ready for us to distill. But this one did work much, much better as far as seeing carbon dioxide production. And, since I've been standing here, I haven't seen a bubble, but it should do one fairly shortly. But it just seemed to be more vigorous in the action, and that's since slowed down. So what we'll do is we'll distill this one probably next week, and we'll take a look and see how they performed, and do some more learning and seeing if we need to also include some nutritional supplements to our wheat mix. All right, so if you have any questions, go ahead and reach out to us. But at this point, failure is a result, and it's a part of the learning process. So yeah, it did fail, but we learned something, and that is the absolute key, that we learned some information of how to make our process better, so that we can help our students learn better. And quite a learning point for the students. We didn't feed the yeast right. They didn't produce the alcohol that we were looking for. So what do we need to do? So that can be a whole nother side lesson, and just a good experience for our students. A little frustrating for us, but we expected frustration. And we'll see if we run into the same issues with the other mixes. But there you go. There is the wheat one. Here is the results from our sugar treatment, and it is not where we want it. But we'll start it back up this next week and see if we can get more out of it as far as regrowing that culture. Okay, I hope you learned something. Ag Teacher Thoughts out.